I never thought I would reach this point. Until the day he sat on that couch that had been our shared space for so long, looked me straight in the eye and said the words that shattered me to pieces. "You're nothing," he said, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "You're worthless." The words hung in the air between us like a heavy fog that made it hard to breathe. I sat there, staring at him, not knowing if he was joking or if he was serious. But his gaze was cold, unforgiving. And then he pulled out a piece of paper, a divorce petition. "I filed for divorce," he said, not looking at me. All I could do was sit there and be silent. My thoughts raced from one thing to another, never finding peace. How could this happen? How could this happen? We had been together for over a decade, had 2 kids, plans for the future, and now this. How was I supposed to move on? This morning started like most others. I woke up at 6:30, quietly so as not to wake the kids. I made coffee, checked my phone, daydreamed about the day ahead. He was about to leave for work, as usual. We hadn't spoken much that morning, but I felt safe around him. "I love you," I said quietly before he left the room. "I love you too," he replied, smiling, though it was a forced smile. But I didn't know that it would be the last time he would say that to me. The last few months had grown colder between us. We stopped talking about what was important, about our feelings, about our problems. Instead, there was accusation, silence, detachment. "You don't do anything for this family," he would often say. "You just sit at home, watch TV, like you don't need anything." I tried to explain that taking care of the children was also work. I did everything I could to make sure they had everything they needed, but he didn't see it. "You don't understand," he would say when I tried to talk. "You're just worthless." Those words hurt more than I could say. I began to doubt myself. Maybe he was right, maybe I was worthless. But how could I give up so easily? I loved him. I believed in us. That evening, he came home late. I was already going to bed when there was a knock on the door. He was with papers in his hands. "We need to talk," he said, without going inside. I felt my heart clench. "What happened?" His voice trembled. "I filed for divorce," he answered simply. I couldn't believe it. "Why?" "Why?" He shrugged. "You're nothing. I don't want to live with you." Tears froze on my eyelashes. I wanted to scream, fight, run away, but I sat there in silence. After that night, I didn't talk to anyone. I felt empty. My friends called, asking, but I couldn't find the words. "How did this happen?" they asked. "He said I was nothing," I replied, tears rolling down my cheeks. My children didn't even know what to do. They looked at me anxiously, trying to understand what was happening. And I was looking for myself in this chaos, trying not to break. This is just the beginning of my story, and I am ready to tell it all, to the last drop of pain and to the first spark of hope. I sat on the sofa, pressing a pillow to my chest, as if it could at least muffle the pain a little. There was silence in the room, broken only by the soft crying of my children from the next room. Their crying was like an alarm bell, calling me to be strong, even though I couldn't. A lot of thoughts were spinning in my head. Why is he like this with me? What did I do wrong? Each nothing hit my heart like a stone. I tried to remember the moments when we were happy, but they seemed distant, like someone else's memories. And then I started to remember our first kiss, our wedding ceremony when we promised to love each other in joy and sorrow. I remembered his smile when he looked at me with such admiration that I felt as if the world belonged to just the two of us. But now that smile was forgotten, leveled by coldness and indifference. The next morning, I woke up feeling as if I had been run over by a truck. My body ached, my soul burned. The children were still asleep, and I quietly got up to make coffee and gather my thoughts. In the bathroom, the mirror did not reflect the same person I remembered. There stood a woman with eyes filled with sadness and confusion. "You are not worthless," I whispered to myself, looking at my reflection. "You are stronger than you think." But the words did not reach my heart. I was scared to be alone with myself, so I decided to call my friend Marie. "Hi, Marie," I whispered, trying to hold back my tears. "Hi, honey," she replied, her voice suddenly becoming concerned. "Did something happen?" I was silent for a moment, then I poured out everything that was on my mind. The words poured out like rain that never stopped. I told him about his words, about the divorce, about how broken I felt. "It's terrible," Marie said. "But you have to remember, his words don't define your worth. You're a wonderful mother, a good friend, a person who deserves to be loved." Her words warmed me a little, but the emptiness inside remained. After talking to Marie, I went to the children. They woke up, and their smiles, like rays of sunlight, penetrated the fog of my thoughts. I played with them, trying to forget everything, at least for a moment. "Mom, why doesn't Dad smile?" my daughter asked, looking at me with big eyes. I just hugged her and whispered, "He has his problems too, honey. But you and I are strong." At that moment, I felt that I had to be strong. Not for myself, but for them. That same day, I dared to talk to him. I wanted to understand what had happened, why he had broken our world so much. He was sitting at the table, looking at his phone. When I came in, he looked up. "Can we talk?" I asked quietly. He nodded. "I don't understand why you said that. Why do you think I'm worthless?" He sighed, then said coldly, "You haven't changed. You're still the same person who doesn't want to work, who doesn't want to do anything. I'm trying to keep this family together, and you're not." "I'm taking care of the kids," I said. "I'm trying to keep everything under control so you can work, so we have everything we need." "That's not enough," he said. "I need a partner, not just someone who stays at home." I felt tears creep into my eyes again, but this time they were mixed with anger. "You can't see how hard I'm trying," I shouted. "I'm not worthless." He stood up and moved closer. "Maybe you're not worthless," he said quietly, "but you're not doing anything to change that." That conversation left me broken and confused. At that moment, I realized that we were heading towards an abyss, and I didn't know if I could stop the fall. I went to my room, sat on the bed, and closed my eyes. Questions swirled in my head that had no answers. What do I do next? Do we have a future? Am I really worthless? My soul screamed with pain, but at the same time, deep down, there was still hope that everything could be changed. I realized that I had to start with myself. Find strength where it seemed there was none. But how to do that when the world around me was falling apart? The next few days were like in a fog. I walked around the house, doing routine chores, but there was a storm in my heart. Every sound, every word, even the children's gaze reminded me that everything was changing. I started writing my thoughts in a journal so I wouldn't lose myself in this chaos. I wrote about fear, about hope, about wanting to be better, about wanting him to see the real me. This story is just beginning, and I know there will be many difficulties ahead. But I want to tell it as it was, without embellishment, without fear, because it's my story, and it's worth hearing. After that terrible evening, when he told me I was worthless and filed for divorce, I woke up feeling alienated, like a stranger in my own body. This morning was not like any other. Instead of warmth and a familiar rhythm, I was enveloped in coldness and silence that screamed louder than any words. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my thoughts spinning endlessly, like in a kaleidoscope. Memories flooded back like old newsreels. Our first kisses, our laughter, everyday trifles that once seemed so important. And here, among those memories, the bitter hysteria of the present sprouted. He filed for divorce. He said I was worthless. These words echoed in my head incessantly. After several days of not leaving the house and not even answering my friends' calls, I finally dared to call the therapist a friend had once recommended. I was terrified by the very idea of opening up to a stranger, of talking about a pain that even I didn't fully understand. "I want to make an appointment for a consultation," I said, my voice trembling. "Okay," the calm woman on the phone answered. "When is it convenient for you?" And so I sat in a cozy office, filled with books and soft lighting, on a comfortable couch, looking into the eyes of my therapist. "Tell me what brought you here," she asked. I took a deep breath and began. I began to talk about how he called me worthless, how he filed for divorce, about my fears and doubts. "Your story sounds very painful," she said gently, "but this is just one page in your book. You are not worthless. You are a woman who has been through a lot, and this is just the beginning of your new journey." Those words were like a breath of fresh air in the stifling room of my thoughts. When I got home, I realized that I could not simply remain silent. My children were feeling the tension, not even understanding what was happening. My son, 7-year-old Jack, looked at me suspiciously, as if searching for answers. "Mom," he said one evening, "will you be with us?" "Dad doesn't live with us anymore?" I sat down next to him and hugged him tightly. "Yes, Jack," I answered, holding back tears. "Dad lives in another house, but he is still our dad, and I will always be there for you." These words were difficult for me and for the children. We are all like thin crystal glass that cracked with pain but did not want to shatter into pieces. The following weeks became a time of self-discovery. I started taking development courses, signed up for yoga classes, read books about self-discovery. Each new day was a challenge and at the same time, an opportunity to find myself. Once at a yoga class, I met a woman, Laura, who, as it turned out, had gone through similar pain. She told me her story of divorce, of despair that turned into strength. "Don't give up," she told me with a smile. "You are stronger than you think." These words rang in my heart like a bell of hope. However, not all days were filled with hope. Sometimes, when I received a message from him, my heart would clench with pain. One night he wrote to me, "You ruined our life. I regret ever marrying you." These words tore me apart, but I replied with restraint. "We are both to blame, but I am trying to move forward." The next day, he called and started a fight, accusing me of all my sins. "You know that everything would be different if you were normal," he said, and his voice sounded like a cold knife in the back. I didn't answer. I just listened and tried to stay strong because I had to be a support for my children. One evening, when the children were already asleep, I went for a walk along the quiet streets of our neighborhood. The city lights cast long shadows, and the cool air refreshed my head, hot with thoughts. I wondered who I wanted to be next. Should I continue to live in the shadow of the past, or finally become the woman I always wanted to see in myself? The feeling of freedom was mixed with anxiety. Freedom to be myself, but anxiety because of the unknown of the future. I stopped on the bridge, looking down at the dark river that flowed quietly below me. "You are not alone," I whispered to myself. "You still have time and strength." It was a difficult path. Every day is a struggle. But even in the darkness, I began to find small lights of hope. The weeks that followed the conversation with the therapist and the beginning of self-knowledge were both the hardest and most important of my life. It felt like I was standing on thin ice that could break at any moment. Every day I woke up and made a choice, whether to fall into the abyss of despair or fight for myself. I remember one morning, when the kids had gone to school, I was alone in the empty house. The windows let in a cold spring breeze, and the silence reminded me of the emptiness left by his departure. I sat on the kitchen floor, hugged my knees, and cried. The tears flowed unceasingly, as if blurring the old picture of our lives. It was scary to admit that everything was different now. I would have to build my life anew. "You are not alone," I whispered to myself, repeating the words of my therapist. "You can do it." That day, I decided to go to the kids' school to talk to their teachers. I wanted to make sure they were safe and that no one had noticed any changes in their behavior. "Jack has been very withdrawn lately," my math teacher, Mrs. Roberts, told me. "He has stopped talking to his classmates and seems depressed." "I'm trying to talk to him," I said, "but I think he's afraid of losing his dad." Mrs. Roberts put her hand on my shoulder. "Children are very sensitive to changes in the family. It's important that they feel supported. You're doing everything you can." Those words gave me strength. I knew I had to be strong, not only for myself, but for them as well. One Saturday morning, as we were eating breakfast together, my daughter Emily asked me, "Mom, will you always be with us?" I took her hand and looked into her big eyes. "Yes, my dear. Always." Then she said quietly, "Does Daddy not love us anymore?" The question hit me like a bolt from the blue. "No," I said, trying to smile. "Daddy loves you. He's just really confused. But I'll be there for you, and I'll never leave you." She rested her head on my shoulder, and I felt the weight of responsibility fall on me, but with it a new hope. After the children fell asleep, I sat by the window with a cup of hot tea. The moonlight softly illuminated the room, creating the atmosphere of peace I so longed for. I thought about him, about what our love was like, and how we lost it. Where did I go wrong? I asked myself. Why does he devalue me so much? Don't I deserve to be happy? But at the same time, a thought was growing in my heart that happiness did not depend on him. That this was my life, and I had the right to live it the way I wanted. That same evening, my phone rang. His name was on the screen. I hesitated, but I pressed accept. "Hello," he said quietly. "Hello," I answered restrainedly. "Can we talk?" he asked. My heart started beating faster. "Yes," I said. He said that he wanted to meet and discuss everything. That he was also unhappy and wanted to figure out what was happening. This conversation was like the beginning of a new journey, full of pain, but also opportunity. The next day, we agreed to meet at a small cafe on the corner of the street where we had first sat together. I stood by the window and watched him come in. The same old man, but with a certain unspeakable sadness in his eyes. "Hello," he said quietly. "Hello," I replied, trying to stay calm. We sat down at the table and looked at each other like two strangers. "I want to apologize," he began. "I was too harsh. It was hard for me. Maybe I was afraid." "Afraid of what?" I asked. "That we wouldn't be able to be together anymore. That I would lose you and the children." His voice trembled, and in that moment I saw the man I had once loved. You know, he continued, that I didn't mean to hurt you. I just didn't know how to deal with all this. It hurt me a lot, I said honestly. But I want us to try to understand each other. We talked for a long time, opening wounds and trying to sew them up with words. When I returned home, I felt a mixture of fear and hope. Fear that this might be the last time we try. Hope that maybe we could find a way to heal. The children greeted me with hugs, and I realized that it was important for them to see me strong. That day was the beginning of a new stage. A difficult one, but a real one. I sat down at a table in the same cafe where we had once laughed and dreamed together. He came in, a little nervous, and looked at me. It was like meeting a stranger who had once been the dearest to me. "Hello," he said quietly, almost in a whisper. "Hello," I answered, feeling my heart clench in my chest. We started to talk, but at first the words came out weakly and timidly. He asked about the children. I asked about him, but in every sentence there was a pain we were afraid to reveal. "I didn't want it to happen this way," he said, looking into his coffee cup. But it was hard for me. I felt like we were drifting apart, and I didn't know how to change that. His voice was broken, but I remembered the person I once loved. The person who could have been kind and sensitive. "I was hurting a lot too," I replied, "but I didn't know how to help us. It felt like you couldn't see me." He lifted his head and looked me straight in the eye for the first time in a long time. Maybe we were both afraid to tell the truth. Afraid to be vulnerable. That confession brought us closer together than any words had ever been. We sat in silence for a long time, letting the silence speak for us. "What's next?" I finally asked. He sighed heavily. "I don't know, but I want to try, if you're ready." I looked at him, and I felt a hope, albeit a shaky one, arise in me. "I want to try too," I answered. After that meeting, the house was quiet, but a storm raged in my heart. It was the beginning of something new, or the last chance. The next morning, the children saw that I had changed. I was no longer the tired and broken woman I had been lately. "Mom, you're smiling," Jack said, and his eyes lit up. "Yes," I answered. "Today is a special day." And although there was still a long way ahead, I knew that now I was not alone. The days that followed our meeting were filled with nervous anticipation. I found myself often looking at my phone, hoping that he would write or call. But his message did not come. Every missed call or silence became a heavier burden on my soul. One evening, when the children were already asleep, I sat on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, staring into the darkness of the room. The phone in my hands was cold, ruthless. Finally, he wrote, "Can we meet tomorrow?" These words caused a storm of emotions, joy, doubt, fear. I didn't know if I was ready for a new conversation, whether this would be a step forward or another disappointment. The next day, we met in the park, where we used to often walk as a family. Spring was gradually filling the air with the smell of fresh greenery and flowers. We sat on a bench next to each other, while children ran around, birds sang. But there was a tension between us that could not be ignored. "I don't know how to be a family again," he admitted, without looking at me. "I don't know either," I answered honestly. "But if we don't start from scratch, we will never be able to move forward." He bowed his head, and I could see how difficult it was for him to say the next words. "I have made many mistakes," he said quietly. "And not only with you, but with myself too." My heart sank. I wanted to scream in pain, but I held it back. "Do you understand what this all means?" I asked. "Yes," he said. "I need to change, and I want us to try together." But the next few days brought new challenges. That evening, when we tried to talk on the phone, harsh words, old grievances, began to surface. "You never listened to me," he said sharply. "Because you never explained," I replied. We became entangled in a circle of accusations and misunderstandings. These moments became wounds that were difficult to heal. I began to understand that we needed time. Time not only to talk, but also to listen. Time to accept not only our mistakes, but also each other's pain. One morning, I woke up with the thought that I needed to value myself more, even as I tried to save our relationship. I went to the mirror, looked at my reflection, and said, "You deserve to be happy." These words became my mantra. And then a message from him appeared. "I'm ready to talk when you're ready." These words gave me strength. I didn't know where this path would lead us, but I was ready to walk it step by step. Weeks passed, and between us, like a fragile thread, real conversations began to sprout. Not just words, but the truth that we had previously feared. One evening, we met in a quiet park, where the wind gently swayed the branches of the trees. He looked at me without his usual contempt or anger, but with some sincere mixture of remorse and hope. I want you to know, I only saw you when you were fighting with me. Now I understand that not seeing you was my greatest loss, he said. These words cut sharply into my heart. The pain and disappointment woke up again, but along with them, a new warmth appeared. I answered quietly, perhaps we both lost precious time, but I no longer want to live in the shadow of depreciation. If we move on, then only on equal terms. He nodded. And this was the first real agreement between us. At home, the children noticed the changes. They saw us smile again, heard a calm voice. Emily ran to me, hugged me, and Jack, although reserved, still flirted with me more often, as if seeking my support. I felt that I was holding my family in my hands, fragile, damaged, but alive. However, everything was not so simple. One evening, after another quarrel, he again remembered the divorce. I don't know if I can do this anymore, he said. Maybe this is the end. At that moment, I gathered all my strength. If this is the end, then I want him to be honest and calm. But if there is a chance, let's try again. Without pain, without claims. He looked at me for a long time, and I saw the struggle in his eyes. Okay, he finally said. We will try. This was our most difficult agreement, to be honest with ourselves and with each other, without masks and without lies. Because that was what could either save or completely destroy what was once called love. After this conversation, I realized that the real struggle was just beginning. The struggle for respect, understanding, and happiness. But now, I was ready to go this way, knowing that now I am not nothing, but a woman fighting for her life. The months that passed after our last agreement became a real test. We stopped hiding behind resentments and began to build new rules. Every conversation was like a battle. Painful, honest, but necessary. I learned to talk about my fears, not to be afraid to be vulnerable. He learned to listen, not to dismiss, but to try to understand. It was quiet. The children were already asleep, and the house was filled with a silence that could no longer be ignored. He came into the room where I was sitting with a book, but not reading. My thoughts were spinning chaotically. I want to tell you, he began, and I felt my heart beat faster. What? I whispered, afraid to hear the words about divorce again. That I thank you for your patience, for not giving up. I realized that the most valuable thing is you and the children. I want to fight for us, if you do too. Tears welled up in my eyes. It was not a simple statement, but a real confession that not every man is capable of making. I want to fight too, I answered, holding his hand. We sat for so long in silence, feeling that this moment was the beginning of something real. The following days brought changes. We started seeing a family psychologist to learn how to communicate without pain and resentment. The children felt this support. Their smiles became more and more sincere, and the evenings were filled with laughter. I learned to love myself, value my needs, and not be afraid to demand respect. One evening, sitting together in the living room, he took my hand and said, "You are no longer the person I saw you as before. You are strong, wise, and beautiful. Thank you for staying." These words became my greatest gift. I answered him, "And you taught me to believe in myself, even when it seemed that the whole world was against me." We smiled at each other, and it was a real reconciliation, not only between us, but also in my soul. This story is about pain, about loss, and about the strength to get up from your knees. That even when someone says you're worthless, you can prove to yourself and the world that you're worth much more.